Will, can you see my screen? Is it just showing one side of the screen?
Yeah, it's just showing the PowerPoint.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we normally do kind of monthly sort of meetup just to kind of discuss key or important sort of topics. So we thought we'd do something on BigQuery and GA4, given that it's one of the sort of key sort of features of GA4. So I said with the Bristol Digital Analytics Meetup, we actually ran this for about 3 years and obviously kind of paused it due to COVID. So we're looking to kind of re-resume it when we're able, both in person and obviously now we're doing it virtually. We are kind of on the lookout for kind of other topics and talks to cover, and also kind of guest speakers. So I reach out to Will if you have something you want to talk about. So his email is kind of mentioned at the end. We'll just cover, what is GA4, what is BigQuery, benefits of using it, and we've got some example sort of use cases, and just walk up the sort of setup of BigQuery. Just one important thing to note about connecting Google Analytics 4 and BigQuery is one of those things that you can't sort of get the data historically, in the sense that if you haven't linked it, then you're not going to be able to get that data. So the sooner you do link Google Analytics 4 to BigQuery, the sooner you'll have something to play with. So it's kind of a bit like setting up goals in Google Analytics. If you don't have those goals set up, then they're not going to count. The same basically applies with BigQuery. If you don't link it to GA4, you're not going to have that data to play with. Cool. So just quickly a bit about us. So as Will mentioned, so we're based in Bristol near the Suspension Bridge. Bristol's like the biggest kind of tech hub outside of London. It's kind of growing massively on the sort of tech scene. We're next to the sort of train station or engine shed kind of there. We are sort of recruiting for kind of analysts and project managers. So if you're available, email recruitment at or email Chris. So we do digital analytics, mainly kind of Google Analytics and GTM, lots of implementations and setups, normally kind of big enterprise level sort of setups and configurations, and then we're also doing a bit of sort of CRO, A/B testing, and doing more on the analysis side of attribution modeling. Just one kind of quick shout out, if you weren't aware, GA4 rolled out data-driven attribution. I think it was like last Friday. So if you haven't changed the settings in GA4 to data-driven, you should do. I don't know why they don't change it automatically for you, but they don't. You actually got to click into settings and change it to the recommended one for data driven. I think probably new GA4 accounts, they change it to data driven, but his old ones, they don't. It is reversible, so you can turn it to data driven or revert or whatever, but definitely worth changing that default setting on GA4, because that would also potentially impact goals pulled from GA4 into BigQuery. Cool. Companies we work with in lots of sort of sectors, so banking, finance, lead gen, and B2B. This was from MeasureFest and Brighton SEO when we sort of went down there, and I'm sure there was some photos actually from Measure Camp Cardiff when we did it. We did laser bowling there back in the day, but yeah, we're looking to try and do a Measure Camp in Bristol at some point, probably in the next sort of 6 months or so. In terms of what is Google Analytics 4, so obviously the newer version of Google Analytics, it's very much event based, and the interface is also quite different. I'll probably say it's a little bit more for analysts rather than marketers with a GA4 interface. It requires basically more of a learning curve on the UI, but it is potentially more customizable. A couple of key things: obviously bounce rate becomes engagement rate, and obviously the calculation for engagement includes some event data, not just sort of like page views. IP is on by anonymization is on by default, and it obviously accounts for app and web like blended together. And obviously the ability to change the default setting to data driven rather than last click wins is quite good. And obviously there's some more flexibility in those data retention sort of settings for GA4. The key one though, obviously related to this, is that there's this BigQuery connection for GA4, and that's a native thing. So the data flows from Google Analytics 4 into BigQuery every day, and it's automatic. So it's kind of a Google to Google thing. And once you set it up, it just connects. So it used to cost, it used to be part of GA360. So you need like a GA360 license, which is at least 150,000 K in dollars, or best part about 115K in pounds. So obviously that's free now, which is good. We like free. So BigQuery is kind of basically a hosted kind of database, and it allows you to add other information, other sort of tables and other data to supplement your Google Analytics data. So be it CRM data about your users and their interactions, or it could be impression data about banner activity, or email data, or any other kind of data that you want to sort of pull into sort of a data warehouse. And that then obviously means you can potentially run connected queries to answer questions you previously couldn't answer just with the web data. So some kind of key benefits, it's obviously free to connect. It's not quite free, but it's pretty much free. It's so cheap to run some of these queries, obviously depending on the amount of data you're dealing with. It obviously does charge for both hosting and processing, but you're talking like sort of cents or pence. It's very cheap to process and host data. Obviously, unsampled data is very handy. Again, it used to be need GA360 to get unsampled data, and BigQuery allows you to kind of get around that. So it's a huge benefit. Let's say if you're using a GA to report for affiliate conversions, and you need like absolutely reliable data, then unsampled is quite a key thing. And obviously this ability to join to other data and other data sources is extremely useful. There is both a daily stream and a live stream kind of option. So generally speaking, in most cases, you're just going to need the daily stream, unless it's like a news site, or you're doing anything with kind of real-time bidding or impression data where you need that live stream. But there is a slight cost increase if you do enable that live stream kind of setting. And obviously, because a Google product, it integrates with Data Studio, so you can pass your data from GA4 to BigQuery, do your like data manipulation and aggregation in BigQuery, and then pass that back over to Data Studio for your reporting. And then obviously connecting to your CRM like HubSpot and stuff. And it's very quick to run these queries. And obviously you can set your data center to the UK rather than America, which is sometimes kind of a necessary sort of step for big organizations. And obviously it's a native server to server, it's Google to Google, which is great. Obviously, you don't have these problems of using Google Sheets with row limits, and it allows you to get around these limits of 20 custom dimensions on GA3 or 25 user properties on GA4. And the cool thing is, obviously, you can expand out your attributes. So let's say if you've got page ID or user ID as attributes in Google Analytics or in your CRM, then you can widen based off those attributes. So in fact, actually attributes and IDs are becoming increasingly more important. And I did maybe in the notes afterwards, we'll share the sort of generic data dictionary that we use, because there's normally like sort of I think transaction ID is probably missing from that list, but content groups and stuff can also be generated from those IDs. So widening page ID to content groups and page attributes, user ID to user ID values, and transaction ID to sort of profit per transaction, or product ID to widening to the cost of a product. So yeah, those 4 IDs which you'll need, you can use for widening. the other cool thing is that the timestamp of the hit is in there. So if you want to run a query to get a custom user explorer report export, you can do with a lot more granularity and information than in the kind of web interface. And obviously the ability to load aggregated reports means it loads faster. It's a bit like if you're running a pivotal table on Google Sheets, obviously you've got to load the whole table and then it runs a pivotal. With BigQuery, it's obviously running the aggregation and you're just viewing the aggregated data. So that means Data Studio potentially runs a lot faster. It's a bit like it's almost like running the caching bit beforehand, and then sort of you're getting the access to the data in Data Studio on the output. Obviously, because Data Studio doesn't have a sort of a sort of load and transform sort of function, BigQuery does allow you to solve that problem. Also there's other features you can enable. So if, let's say, you only wanted to restrict access to a certain market, like let's say the UK or EMEA, you could put those controls in a table or a view in BigQuery. So there's an additional kind of benefit for access to that data. And then obviously these newer features with machine learning and predictions, which obviously Google Analytics doesn't support, but BigQuery potentially does by tapping into these additional sort of features. Probably not going to cover machine learning and BigQuery ML on this particular talk. We were trying to keep it a bit more basic, but that's something that could be that's pretty worth looking at into next time. In terms of the cost, it's very cheap. And obviously there's a free allowance. I think it's 3 months the free allowance lasts for. So but I'd be surprised if you sort of go over that $300 per month allowance. So when you create an account, just click the enable free allowance and in order to kind of get that. So in terms of connecting GA4 to BigQuery, what we'll do is I'll just try playing a video on here and just see if it will work. Just before I play this video, there are 2 prerequisites that we recommend before connecting GA4 to BigQuery. The first one is you should create what's called a Google organization. So that's, if you go to, or Will, if you could just add that link into the chat window, marketingplatform.google.com and then home, and it'll have a little button there. It says create organization. Now, although this is something that J360 sort of uses, it's also helpful to do from the start, just to kind of make sure you kind of get your ducks in a row and set up properly, because when you create a BigQuery project, it will then it will automatically put it into that Google organization. So obviously if you haven't created a Google organization and then you later create a BigQuery project or a Google Cloud project, then you've got to kind of go back in and attach it to the organization. So you might as well do that bit first, create the organization, which only takes like 5 minutes to create. Just enter your company name and then link to your existing sort of Google entities, so Google Analytics, AdWords, Google Optimize, etc. Then once you've done that, then go to the next step of going to the cloud.google.com for the Cloud Console. And you need to create a project first before you can link to GA4 to BigQuery. I don't know why the GA4 doesn't automatically create a project. It might be because of the billing entity, but it doesn't. You've got to do it this way around. You've got to create that Google Cloud account first, then it will let you get to the next bit. So I'll then show you this next bit, which is a video which is just hidden. I'll just show it on the screen instead, which is here. Whoops. So let's pause that for a second. So if you go to GA4 and then go into, scroll down on GA4 and you'll see an option where it says BigQuery linking, and you basically need to click on that. And then you'll see this connection screen. So assuming you've created a project already, in the Google Cloud Console, you'll see it in the list, and it will then let you link to that project. obviously generally select a data center local to you. So obviously London in our case is the nearest one, or I think there is one for Europe. Then it will give you the 3 options to attach. Normally, and you can see yeah, as you change those. Normally, I suggest selecting daily and advertiser features. For streaming, only sort of tick or enable streaming if it is like a news site, or if you need that real-time kind of data, because it does charge you a little bit more for streaming. And then just click create or submit. So that then means it's going to start sending daily data from GA4 over to a BigQuery, and you're going to be able to run sort of queries on that. Cool. There is also a demo account for BigQuery. So if you want to sort of see some example tables, it's worth just connecting to that. If you literally just search for BigQuery demo account, there's a help page, and it takes you to that account to get access to example tables within there. In the previous bit where I said when you need to create a project, so you basically, when you first go to a Google Cloud, and this wasn't shown in that video, it will show you, you'll go to this interface, and within here in the top right, you'll see an option where it says My First Project. If you click on that, it will then drop down, and you'll see an option where it says New Project. And obviously within there, you need to create this project to connect to GA4. So, oops, that's the video we just showed. Oops, this is obviously, once you've created that project, this just walks through a process of just linking those fields we just saw on that video. So that's just out of curiosity, could you put in the chat how many people have already got their GA4 accounts linked to BigQuery already and are collecting that data currently? Just put like a +1 or a yes or something in the chat. Not yet, okay. As I said, it's kind of if you're not linking already, you should be, because as I said, you can't turn back time, unfortunately. So not done BigQuery and GA4 linking yet. Okay. It's also just one other mention. Google also literally they're almost like rolling out features every 2 weeks of GA4 at the moment. They also rolled out 4 weeks ago the connection between Search Console and GA4. That one does run historically, so once you link it, it runs a historic look back to pull in other data. And obviously you can link AdWords to GA4 as well. Cool. All right, good to know. So what we've this bit here, and Artem, feel free to kind of jump in or add on these bits. And we've just put some example kind of queries down here. So this would be more a good starting point is to just run example queries of the GA4 data to see if the data looks the same as the data in Google Analytics. So things like session counts, event counts, transaction counts, just basically to kind of double validate. And just get used to using the sort of the language of GA4. So of BigQuery, sorry. So BigQuery is SQL based. So you're gonna be writing. It's not like a web interface like Google Analytics. So you are going to have to write this using a programming language, be it a relatively straightforward one. And there are example queries, so a bit like kind of a cookbook. So if you search for what is the query for the sum of sessions on a GA4 in BigQuery, there's lots of examples kind of out there. So here's some other examples. So this is a count of users.
Just need to share your screen, Phil.
Sorry. Oops. So the I'll go back there. So this is a count of users here. So it's just doing a select unique number of users. This one's using the a demo GA4 kind of obfuscated data set. And then this is a count of sessions per date. And then the sessions per acquisition source. And then obviously sorting via a volume in this case. Obviously, because you're now dealing with a kind of a database or a warehouse, you need to be aware of the types of fields that are being kind of exported. In the same way that you have like metrics and dimensions in Google Analytics, you're going to have sort of strings and numbers or doubles and floats in this case. That can have an impact when you're trying to run certain sort of functions. Obviously, you know, if you're running a sum of function, it needs to be numeric. There is obviously the GA4 kind of ID that gets pulled over from Google Analytics. Occasionally there's some slight differences in counts between GA4 and BigQuery. That's just because in GA4 Google has some additional identifiers for double click, but it will pass over the basically kind of a unique identifier similar to the GA client ID. It is also though worth sort of passing your user ID into Google Analytics or GA4, and then obviously getting that passed over, because that's going to be a primary key for user ID analysis and lifetime customer value analysis. I'm trying to think what the other note on this one was. So Artem just asked us just to kind of mention some warnings in terms of, and this is more on the kind of large kind of data sets. So this would be more on big enterprises. Just be careful, use it, and this applies with most kind of databases. Obviously, you don't want to use any wildcard select functions because they'll cost you more in terms of both the time it takes for a query to run and also the cost of a query. So you want to try and be specific with certain queries that you do run, and also try and use the preview or check the estimated amount of time or size of a database. In the top corner before you run a query, it will say the database size, or you can go into a table and you can actually see how large that table is before you run it. I don't, Artem, if you had any other sort of comments to note on this, just in terms of, sort of best practices for large kind of data sets.
As I see here, it's better to use cluster to partition tables, and GA4 is actually it's partitioned by date. So the main idea should get only data you need, because you pay for each request, and that's why you have to select only needed data. And if you know there is a limit statement for SQL, but it doesn't help to limit the amount of data you try to select. So limit is not helpful with cost control. And there is another like basic best practice: just avoid self joins, use analytic function instead, and also they provide some links in this tutorial for best practice.
Cool. Is it, I'm right in thinking, Artem, you could like limit the number of rows returned on a query, or the rows analyzed?
Do you mean limit?
Yeah,
of course, limit it returns limit amount in browse, but query have to scan all the table, so you have to pay for all data you scan.
Cool. But obviously, this is only on if this is a very large kind of amount of data. You could restrict this by if it's only a shorter amount of time to reduce the size of the table. I think it's probably worth maybe if we just mention some example kind of business use cases. We just kind of wrote these down here. Obviously, whoops. A good example, this is a classic one from e-commerce, which would be, they say that 10% of your customers might equate to 50% of your revenue. So if you're able to connect, let's say Magento or your lead management system to BigQuery, then you can run this grouping of your user ID and the revenue from that user, and then put those users into clusters or into cohorts, and identify those high value users. It's a bit like content groups, but for like user groups. And the good thing there would be you can then almost do lookalikes for these user groups to work out what they do, where they reside, and where they come from. Likewise, or that you might have heard the term kind of the whales, as in like large customers. On the flip side, there may be certain users that are low value, like dolphins, which just land on a site, have a look around and never buy. So splitting out or identifying those high value users is something that is going to be a lot easier to do in BigQuery, especially if, let's say, you've got like 10 years worth of data or 10 years worth of orders. Running that in Google Analytics, you might be restricted to like a 2-year look back, and you may have certain transactions that got blocked by ad blockers and stuff. So that ability to look at the actual data and do analysis on the sort of truth and is quite a key business benefit. The other one as well is obviously connecting to a CRM system like HubSpot or Salesforce, and then getting those offline journeys connected with the online journeys attached to your sort of GA client ID and your user ID. That also gives you the option of potentially shifting from return on ad spend bidding and ROI based bidding to profit per customer bidding, which is a fundamental shift, and gives you potentially a kind of a USP above or a way to outperform your sort of competitors. Again, on the e-commerce example, a common use case is to upload the cost of of products, so cost of goods sold file, and attach that to your product ID, so you can then work out your profit per product, and thus your profit per sale, and thus your profit per customer. And then obviously, if you've got your media spend data attached to the Google Click ID, you could potentially run that return on investment and profit per customer in a very kind of cool and effective way. The other sort of notes, if you have a business that needs either custom sessionization, so for example, let's say you wanted to group via companies rather than users, in BigQuery you can adjust that clustering, or if you wanted to run reports on show me all of the interactions from these people in a company, what they've done, then that's sort of possible. And also the attribution, there's the possibility of adjusting the attribution model so that if you wanted to do custom attribution for specific channels, that's also possible within the sort of the query. The other sort of joins or common use cases would be pulling in phone call data as well, and attaching that to the sort of session ID, especially given that well, at the moment, no phone call providers that I'm aware of, like Infinity and Response Tap, etc., none of them connect to GA for events directly at the moment. So your only option is a BigQuery kind of import and BigQuery kind of connection. That's a good and as I mentioned before about the affiliates kind of example, getting kind of that raw sort of data. The other sort of key one is obviously the ability to do predictions into the future. And work out comparing like versus a budget or versus seasonality, and a more advanced analysis. Obviously in Google Analytics you've got your kind of intelligent alerts, but this is going the next level on from using intelligent predictions based off your own kind of data. So I thought I'd just kind of mention that if you have your own kind of use cases or examples that you've encountered or are currently using, please put them in the chat for anything that we've missed, or if instances of where you're currently using BigQuery and it's kind of there's a killer feature or killer benefit, that would be really interesting to hear from. Did we have any sort of questions in the chat regarding that piece just before we jump onto the other kind of query examples? I am curious to see what data sets people are joining together in addition to the CRM data and the e-commerce data, and then obviously kind of call tracking information. Is there a particular data set that's been joined and a value that's been derived from that? Okay, cool. I'll jump back to the slides. Artem, are there any particularly good kind of blogs or kind of help videos that you've sort of seen that you'd recommend to people that are looking to learn BigQuery?
Can I share my screen or should I?
Oh yeah, it's recorded by the way. So
okay, share screen 1 second. I think if you don't mind, we can back to the first slides. I just want to share this, the schema, what exact data they have from GA4 to BigQuery. And this is the sample data. Everybody can get it, and you don't need to connect your own account. It's always free and you can get it. So there is every day has the separate table. For example, this is the date, and there is a schema. So they have a lot of information about users, about devices, about traffic sources, about stream, about events. And as you see, this schema rather huge, and you can preview the data, and it's always free to preview, because for querying you pay for query, but for the preview is totally free. So and I want to share just not to show just simple queries to understand how to get this data. And before we go to this, I just want to point some, I think, useful information. First of all, this is user ID and user received ID. User ID, this is parameter we set up in GA4. And if you don't set up it, you will have none here. And you always have user received ID. It's like cookie ID for web and device ID for apps. And there is another important thing. It's about traffic source, but it's important to know the traffic source. It's not the session traffic source. It's the acquisition traffic source. So this is the traffic medium and source and campaign for the first visit, for the first user visit, and it won't change for the future sessions and for other sessions. So you shouldn't use this data if you want to get session information, session medium, and session source. But if you want to find this medium and source for each sessions, you have to go to event params. And this is information about each event. And for example, in preview, we can see each row here. This is a one event. For example, this is a page view event. And this is all parameters for this page view event. As you see, each parameter has a key, like gclit, and value. But value can be either string or int value or float or double value. So for example, J session number is the int value. So you have to get this value, but for example, for page location, this is string value, and you have to get the string value information. And it's rather another important event param, it's J session ID. J generate this ID automatically, but you should be, what you should know, this is not unique ID. It's unique only for one user. So actually this is timestamp, I think. So if you want to get like unique session ID, you have to combine this ID, the user pseudo ID. And this way you will have unique session ID. So I want to show you some basic queries. For example, this one, first one. If you want to get an amount of sessions, you can, of course, you can count amount of unique session ID combined with user pseudo ID, but the right way is count session start event. In this way, the number will be the same you got in the GA4 interface. And so in this query, this is the simple query, you just count pseudo ID from the 1 day table. So events table for 1 day, and you get users, amount of users for this 1 day. But if you want to query not 1 day, but date range, you have to use special special table suffix. And so the table name should be end of star, and in where you should add table suffix between 2 days you want to get date. So here's example, we just get event dates and count events event name for each event, the event name equals session start. So this way we just get amount of sessions per day. But in all examples here we use only 1 day table, but if you want to get data range, you just can change the query using table suffix, and it works. So as I said, traffic source is not for session source and media. It's about the acquisition source. So just to know about it. And
I think,
as I said,
Artem, I think that's quite good, like kind of gotchas like that, which might catch people out. It's quite good to sort of share those, especially because it is, the interface is you know, it's more of a like a programming language, or so I think that's helpful.
Okay, and so we can just run these queries. For example, this query, as I said, return event day and amount of sessions. You just can, here you, before run any query, you can get this amount of data will be scanned. So for example, if it's megabytes, it's not a problem, but if it's terabytes, it can cost a lot. So you always, if you query rather big data set, you should be, the bill can be very high. But if it's about megabytes, it's not a problem at all. One of the best practices, if you want just to play the data, you can just save some subset of data. You can go to the query settings and save the result to some data set, create separate tables, and after that play with this data, subset of data. In this case, you always will, your bill not be so high because you will query just subset of data. Another example is just about traffic source. As you see, we get traffic source, medium, and amount of users, count, distinct user pseudo ID. So this is the for 1 day test data. As you see, this the Google hides some sources because it's a demo data set. They don't show you all sources, but as example, it's rather useful. And but if you want to get some event params, as you see, there is, for example, one line with all params with all case, and if you want to get only one, for example, value for J session ID, you have to unnest data. So the data is now is repeated. Now event params is repeated field. So in one row they have all the data, all params about for one event. But if we unnest the data, for example, here we unnest event params, and now we can get k value for each param. So now each row it's separate event param, not the separate event, but separate event param. And in this way, we can get separate value and filter by, for example, getting J session ID. This is a very common technique for all queries. And you have to, if you want to read more about unnest and cross join, we've got a link inside our our presentation, and you can read more about this. And after that, if you can just extract event params, you can do more complicated queries like this. Here we get session source medium and amount of sessions and users, but there is not acquisition. This is about session source, and that's how we get it. And first of all, we use with us. It's like we're creating like temporary table for each event. So for each event, we get user pseudo ID and select parameter here. This is subquery, and the unnest event params. So we get small table with all event params in each line, and get only one row with J session ID. So this return the session ID param for each event. And the next one, we try to get medium and source. But here we get not only select, we also get max. The problem is this select from a nest event param key can return null, because not all events get this medium. I can show you here. For example, okay. For example, page U don't have this source and medium. I try to find.
Artem, I'm sort of conscious of time here. So but I think the key thing I was going to say, I mean, for some of these, because GA4 in effect is structured data, the fields and values are going to be the same in all instances. Those kind of that cookbook of queries, someone could just grab that exact query, stick it into their own BigQuery project, and it will just run with those results. Assuming obviously there's no like dates in the query. So that the cookbook approach is a way for people to kind of sort of start experimenting. I'm just gonna jump onto just a couple of other sort of notes. I'll jump back to your screen in a second, Artem. Okay. So I think we'll put this on the end from our last event, so apologies for the crazy photo on that one. If you send us an email to hello@, we'll send you a copy of the slides. One other sort of shout out, we've got a GTM kind of cleaner or cleanup tool, which is free. So it's gtmcleaner.com. Will, if you just put the chat in the link in the chat window, and that will actually automatically sort of clean up your account. It's one that we use on all of our kind of audits and setups now. So it's been heavily tested already, and we're releasing both the light and the pro version of that tool. So yeah, if you could just, but we're keen to get feedback from people. So if you could try out that tool. So it's gtmcleaner.com, and in the bottom right hand corner, it will you'll have a Hotjar survey for feedback. It'd be great to get some feedback on that. So it's just gtmcleaner.com, and a little feedback survey down here. I love the tool, and then that'd be great. So please try that out. All it does is if you export your GTM account, upload it from here, and possibly if you want it really clean, click delete pause tags once per page, press clean, and it will give you an output which is your cleaned up container. We've also got the pro version, which is free at the moment, which also adds folders and adds a workspace. So please try that out and give us feedback on it. The other thing, as I mentioned, we're after kind of other speakers to talk about specific topics in the future, or if you've got a problem that you need solving and you want us to do a webinar about it, as a bit of a way of kind of crowdsourcing that problem, reach out to us afterwards, and we'll see if we can do it as a webinar. That's everything I want to sort of cover for today. Is there any sort of questions in chat that people have, either for myself or Artem or Will? Or if you want to kind of raise your hand and jump on the stage, you can do. I'm just going to pause the recording now.